Bill O'Reilly leaned forward in his chair, his voice carrying that trademark smirk disguised as authority. With a casual cruelty sharpened by years in the spotlight, he scoffed at Jasmine Crockett's career. "Let's be honest," he sneered. "You're not exactly the kind of professional people take seriously. Maybe you stumbled into politics, but a real career? That's questionable at best." The words cut through the air like glass shattering. The studio audience froze. Some gasped, others whispered, a ripple of disbelief spreading across the room. It wasn't just an insult. It was an attempt to erase everything she had built, to reduce a lifetime of sacrifice to a dismissive punchline. You could feel the tension tighten, the silence stretch, the country's collective breath holding steady. O'Reilly leaned back, smug, convinced his line had landed the final blow. He wore that familiar look, the arrogance of a man too certain of his own dominance, too sure the room would stay on his side. But the eyes of the audience told a different story. They weren't laughing. They weren't nodding. They were waiting, and in that wait the drama thickened. Crockett's face remained composed, unreadable. Her silence was heavier than his words, and the anticipation became electric. Everyone could sense it, that she was holding something back, a line, a truth, a moment that would flip the stage upside down. What happened next wasn't just another debate exchange. It wasn't just a clever retort or a polished soundbite. It was a moment so sharp, so unforgettable, that it would ripple far beyond the walls of that studio. What Jasmine Crockett said next will be studied for years, and that is where the real story begins. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to step back and look at the stage on which it unfolded. Bill O'Reilly was no stranger to controversy. For decades, he had thrived on provocation, interrupting, belittling, mocking. His empire was built on confrontation, on making opponents appear small while his voice thundered as the last word. To some, he was the gatekeeper of tough talk. To others, he was the bully who dressed arrogance in a suit and tie. Either way, the pattern was clear. Dominate the stage, diminish the challenger, walk away untouchable. But this time, his target was Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose rise in American politics was nothing short of remarkable. Crockett wasn't born into privilege. She carved her path through grit, intellect, and unshakable conviction. In Congress, she had become a force, sharp with her words, fearless in her defense of marginalized communities, unapologetic about who she was and whom she represented. For many watching, she was more than a politician. She was a mirror of their own struggles and their own pride. So when O'Reilly launched his insult, it wasn't just about her resume. It was about something larger. A man representing the old guard of power and privilege taking aim at a woman who embodied change, diversity, and the shifting identity of America itself. This clash struck at the intersection of gender, race, and power. It wasn't simply television, it was history, playing out in real time. The audience could feel it. They weren't just witnesses to a verbal spar. They were participants in a generational showdown. The silence that followed his jab was more than awkwardness. It was the collective recognition that something was about to shift. And millions watching at home would soon understand that this was bigger than careers or talking points. Because what Jasmine Crockett was about to deliver wasn't just a comeback. It wasn't just a defense of her name. It was a moment that carried the weight of centuries of voices silenced, disrespected, or ignored, and the vindication of watching one voice finally break through. But this wasn't just another insult, it became a cultural earthquake. For years, Bill O'Reilly stood as the towering figure of conservative media. He wasn't just a host, he was an institution. His show dominated cable news ratings, his books climbed bestseller lists, and his name carried a weight that could make or break careers. In the eyes of his loyal followers, O'Reilly wasn't a commentator. He was a cultural warrior, a man who spoke with a certainty that brooked no doubt. Swagger was his brand and dominance was his method. He built his empire on spectacle. Night after night, he delivered his monologues with that unmistakable cadence, half sneer, half lecture, turning complex issues into sharp binaries of us versus them. He didn't just debate. He dismantled, often by talking over guests until their arguments dissolved under his booming interruptions. For those who agreed with him, it was theater, proof of his strength. For those who didn't, it was bullying masquerading as analysis. Either way, O'Reilly's voice was inescapable. But with that swagger came shadows. Controversies clung to him like smoke to a fire. Accusations of harassment, settlements quietly paid out, eruptions of temper off camera. These became the whispered counter-narrative to his polished image. He projected authority on screen, yet behind the curtain, cracks were spreading through the foundation of his empire. Still, in his mind, none of that mattered. O'Reilly believed his position was untouchable. He believed he could outshout, and outlast anyone who dared challenge him. That belief was his greatest weapon and his greatest weakness. Arrogance made him blind to the changing landscape, blind to the rising power of voices he had long dismissed. And so, when Jasmine Crockett sat across from him, he thought it was another routine skirmish. Another chance to remind the world of his dominance. He underestimated her, the way he had underestimated countless others. But this time it was different. This time the audience wasn't entirely on his side. This time the country was listening with sharper ears, aware of the shifts happening in politics, culture, and identity. O'Reilly entered that room armed with the same tactics he had used for decades: the dismissive interruptions, the sharp-edged condescension, the smirk that suggested superiority was his birthright. He believed it would be enough. He believed that one line, one jab, could undo a woman whose entire career was built on proving people like him wrong, and for a brief moment, it seemed like it worked. The room gasped. The silence was heavy. He leaned back, certain that the old formula still had power. But what he didn't see, what his arrogance kept him from noticing, was the shift in the air. The audience wasn't laughing with him. They were bracing for her. That was O'Reilly's blind spot. He mistook silence for surrender. He mistook composure for weakness. He mistook the patience of his opponent for the absence of a response. In reality, that silence was a storm gathering its strength. Bill O'Reilly had built his empire on dominance, but empires, no matter how tall they rise, always carry the seeds of their own downfall. His was arrogance, and Jasmine Crockett was about to expose it in front of the nation. Long before Jasmine Crockett's name made its way across headlines, long before she stood toe-to-toe with media giants and political heavyweights, she was a daughter of working-class grit. Raised without the privileges that cushion so many who rise in politics, she understood early on that her path would not be paved, it would have to be carved. Her childhood wasn't one of abundance, but of resilience. Every obstacle, every slight, every dismissal of her potential planted the seeds of the fighter she would become. She chose law as her weapon, not because it promised prestige, but because it promised service. Crockett believed in using knowledge to defend those who could not defend themselves. She took on cases others ignored, representing the poor, the marginalized, the forgotten. In dingy courtrooms where voices were often silenced by poverty or prejudice, she raised her own, challenging systems that had long been stacked against people like her clients and against people like her. But for every case she won, there was another battle waiting. The world of politics was no kinder. As a black woman stepping into spaces long dominated by men, she was met with skepticism, condescension, and outright hostility. Her intelligence was questioned, her motives picked apart, her identity used as a weapon against her. She was underestimated so often it nearly became routine, but rather than breaking her spirit, it sharpened her resolve. Each slight became fuel. Each insult became a reminder of why her voice was needed. When she entered Congress, it wasn't with the polish of someone born into legacy. It was with the scars of someone who had fought for every inch of ground she stood on. Those scars made her relatable. They made her human. People saw in her not a distant politician, but a reflection of themselves. The working mother, the first-generation student, the outsider told they would never belong. Her story wasn't just hers. It was theirs, and that authenticity carried power. In hearings, she spoke plainly, without pretension. In debates, she wielded facts like a sword, but tempered with humor and humanity. She did not shrink when confronted, nor did she lash out recklessly. She learned the art of composure, the ability to let arrogance exhaust itself before delivering a single line that cut deeper than 1,000 insults. That composure became her hallmark. Still, every step forward came with resistance. The whispers of too ambitious, the headlines questioning her tone, the colleagues who dismissed her as inexperienced. These were not rare moments, but daily realities. Yet through it all, Crockett carried herself with a calm resilience. She didn't deny the bias. She defied it. She didn't beg for validation. She commanded respect. It's easy to forget that the heroes we see in defining moments are not made in those moments. They are forged long before in struggles unseen by the cameras. For Crockett, the long nights studying when others doubted her, the early mornings fighting for clients who couldn't pay, the years of being told she didn't belong, all of it was preparation. Preparation for the spotlight, for the confrontation, for the test that would come when she faced one of the most practiced antagonists in American media. So when Bill O'Reilly lobbed his insult, when he leaned back in the comfort of arrogance, Crockett didn't flinch because she had already heard it all before. Different words, different faces, but the same dismissal, the same condescension, the same attempt to put her back in a box that never fit. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly see, was that every battle she had fought up to that moment was sharpening her for this one. Jasmine Crockett's story was never about arriving with privilege. It was about fighting her way into rooms where people like her weren't supposed to stand. It was about enduring, learning, and then standing taller. And as she prepared to respond to O'Reilly, all of those years of grit and grace came to bear. All those battles were preparing her for this moment. The insult had landed, and Bill O'Reilly basked in the silence it created. He leaned back in his chair, that self-satisfied grin stretching across his face, eyes glinting with the certainty that he had just dismantled his opponent with a single stroke. But instead of retreating, he pressed harder. "You see, this is the problem with people like you," he continued, his voice rising with the confidence of repetition. "You talk a big game about justice and representation, but where's the real accomplishment? Where's the record? You're not a builder, you're a talker. You're someone who slid into the spotlight because the media loves a story, not because you've earned a seat at the table." Gasps rippled again through the audience. Some heads turned, others shook slowly. They weren't hearing a critique. They were witnessing a takedown attempt. And O'Reilly was doubling down, stacking insult upon insult, as if burying Crockett under a pile of dismissals might erase her presence altogether. He gestured broadly, as though commanding the stage belonged solely to him. This country needs leaders, not activists. It needs results, not rhetoric. And with all due respect, Congresswoman, you're simply not cut from that cloth. But through it all, Crockett sat steady. Her expression remained composed, her eyes fixed not on O'Reilly's sneer, but on something beyond it, as if she had already seen this act before, rehearsed by 1,000 others who underestimated her. The more he pressed, the calmer she became. It was a kind of stillness that unnerved, a quiet dignity that made every insult echo louder. The audience sensed it too. You could feel the tension rising, an invisible rope being pulled tighter and tighter between arrogance and patience. People leaned forward in their seats not because O'Reilly had captivated them, but because Crockett's silence had. There was something in the way she didn't flinch, didn't bite, didn't interrupt. The restraint itself became the spectacle. O'Reilly mistook it for weakness. He grew bolder, sharper, his tone dripping with contempt. "Face it," he said, shaking his head. "You're in over your head. And deep down you know it. Everyone knows it. You're here because of identity politics, not because of merit. Strip that away and what are you left with?" The words lingered like smoke in the air, heavy, choking, impossible to ignore. The audience recoiled, not just at the insult, but at the brazenness of it, the way it carried the weight of every dismissal hurled at women, at black leaders, at anyone who dared to break barriers. This was more than a debate, it was a moment of revelation. And still Jasmine Crockett didn't break. Her breathing steady, her gaze unwavering, she absorbed every word with the quiet assurance of someone who knew the storm would pass, and that she would still be standing when it did. The tension was unbearable now. The silence between O'Reilly's words stretched longer, thicker, filled with anticipation. The audience wasn't on his side anymore. They were waiting for her, waiting for the response that everyone knew was coming, waiting for the moment the silence would give way to something unforgettable. And then Crockett leaned forward, and everything changed. The studio held its collective breath. The light seemed sharper now, the air thicker as if the very room had leaned forward with the audience. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She didn't lunge for words or react to O'Reilly's arrogance. Instead, she paused. A beat, 2 beats. In that slow, deliberate silence, the weight of every slight she had endured, the dismissals, the underestimations, the whispers of "you don't belong," hung between them like a tangible force. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the audience, the cameras, the millions watching at home. There was no fury in her gaze, only clarity. Her posture didn't waver. Her hands rested calmly, but her presence filled the room. Every muscle, every micro-expression communicated a single truth. She was ready. And then she spoke. Her words were precise, unflinching, cutting through the noise like a scalpel through thickened air. Each sentence landed with weight, punctuated by the kind of cadence that forced listeners to pay attention, forced them to reconsider assumptions. She recounted her record, her work, the lives she had touched, the battles she had won quietly, tirelessly, without fanfare. She framed her accomplishments not as bragging, but as testament, proof that service, diligence, and integrity endure when arrogance falters. The audience's reaction was immediate, visceral. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Gasps broke into murmurs. Heads tilted in disbelief. Then came the long, hesitant applause, building gradually until it swelled into a crescendo that filled every corner of the studio. Some jaws dropped in awe. Some viewers leaned forward, stunned at the sheer composure and power behind her words. Others whispered to each other, "She just dismantled him," flawlessly, and then the ripple began. Across social media platforms, clips of the exchange were already circulating. Tweets appeared almost instantly. "This is leadership. Jasmine Crockett just schooled Bill O'Reilly, watch this." Calm, composed, unstoppable. Crockett moment. Memes and reaction videos started emerging within minutes. The hashtags surged. Millions of people watched, shared, and debated. Her message wasn't just contained within the studio. It had gone viral, becoming a beacon of resilience and intelligence in a media landscape that often rewarded bluster over substance. Meanwhile, O'Reilly's confidence, so carefully constructed over decades, began to crack. His grin faltered. The smirk, once a shield, seemed suddenly out of place. He opened his mouth, closed it again. He attempted to speak, to interject, to regain control, but the rhythm had shifted. The dominance he had relied on was slipping through his fingers, replaced by the undeniable authority of composure and truth. Every word he had relied on to assert superiority now felt hollow in the shadow of her calm, unwavering presence. Crockett's line, her career-affirming, defining statement, resonated not just because it was clever, but because it embodied everything she represented: resilience, intelligence, dignity, and the refusal to bow under the weight of someone else's arrogance. It wasn't a victory born of confrontation alone. It was the triumph of preparation, patience, and purpose. The cameras captured it all: the subtle shift in the audience's posture, the expressions of shock and admiration, the palpable tension in the studio air. The silence that followed her words was different this time, not the oppressive quiet of intimidation, but the stunned, reverent pause of a room realizing they had witnessed something historic. And yet, the impact wasn't confined to that room. Across the country, across platforms, people felt it. They felt her poise, her intelligence, her courage. Clips circulated with comments layering admiration and disbelief. Finally, someone stands up like this. This is how you lead. Dignity over arrogance, every time. The exchange sparked conversations about gender, race, and the kinds of leadership America needs. Debates that would last far longer than a single broadcast. Through it all, Crockett remained composed. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She let the moment speak for itself. And in that restraint, in that unwavering calm, she demonstrated something far more profound than winning a verbal exchange. She showed the world the power of integrity, preparation, and unwavering self-belief. By the time the applause subsided and the cameras shifted, one truth was undeniable. Bill O'Reilly had faced a force he could not control, a presence that shattered the narrative he had spent decades building. Authority rooted in arrogance faltered. Respect rooted in action endured, and the nation had witnessed it all. The moment had barely ended, and yet its echoes were already everywhere. On Twitter, the hashtags began to climb, first slowly, then like wildfire. Crockett moment, dignity wins. Leadership redefined. Clips of her calm, precise takedown circulated within minutes, each replay fueling more discussion, more admiration. Memes sprang up with lightning speed, some humorous, some reverent, but all sharing a common theme. Jasmine Crockett had just delivered a masterclass in composure and intellect, and the world had noticed. Late-night comedians couldn't resist. Monologues opened with her name, the audience erupting in laughter and applause as hosts recounted the exchange, highlighting her sharp wit and unshakable demeanor. Social media users shared gifs of her poised stance, her measured hand gestures, her eyes locked on the audience as if daring arrogance itself to challenge her. Each share, each retweet spread the moment further, cementing it in the cultural consciousness. Meanwhile, news commentators on every network replayed the exchange, dissecting every word, every pause, every subtle inflection. Analysts praised Crockett's composure, calling it a blueprint for leadership under fire, and a lesson in resilience and dignity. Former politicians, activists, and public figures weighed in, amplifying the ripple effect. In homes across the country, people watched in awe, whispering to one another. She didn't just respond, she redefined the moment. Supporters rallied online and offline. Town halls, political groups, and community forums buzzed with excitement, discussing not only Crockett's rebuttal, but the significance behind it. A black woman holding her ground against a media powerhouse without compromising her integrity. For many, she became more than a politician. She became a symbol of dignity under fire, of courage tempered with intelligence, of the idea that rising above arrogance is a victory in itself. People posted personal stories of being underestimated, dismissed, or ignored, sharing how Crockett's example resonated deeply with their own experiences. And yet, even as the applause faded and the memes multiplied, a sense of suspense lingered. The nation had seen the verbal victory, the social media storm, the commentators' praise, but the story wasn't over. Viewers sensed, deep in the way only cinematic moments create, that there was more to come. Crockett's words had landed, her reputation had soared, and yet the moment was only the beginning of a larger shift in perception, influence, and impact. The air was charged with anticipation. People speculated, debated, and waited, wondering what her next move might be. Could one person, through calm authority and measured words, inspire change far beyond a single debate? The answer seemed to hang in the balance, poised just beyond the horizon. And then, as the digital world buzzed and commentators continued to replay every frame, it became clear this wasn't just a fleeting viral sensation. Something bigger was unfolding, something that would reverberate beyond hashtags and news cycles. But what Crockett did next transformed the moment into something far greater. As the echoes of the debate faded, the true weight of Jasmine Crockett's response began to crystallize. What had initially appeared as a simple retort, polished, measured, undeniable, was revealed to be something far deeper, a reframing of the entire confrontation. O'Reilly's insult, intended to diminish, to assert dominance, became instead a mirror reflecting timeless truths. Service, dedication, and integrity were the currencies that endure. Status, arrogance, and bluster, no matter how loud, crumble under scrutiny and time. Crockett had shown that real power doesn't need to shout. It manifests quietly, consistently in action and principle. Her victory was not just verbal, it was moral. In the subtle cadence of her words, she demonstrated a fundamental law of leadership. Calm courage is louder than bluster. While others may seek to dominate with volume and aggression, the one who stands firm, who refuses to compromise dignity for the sake of spectacle, commands a resonance that outlasts applause. It is in restraint, in measured conviction, that influence is forged. And in that truth, Crockett's example transcended the studio, becoming a template for anyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. This was particularly poignant for women navigating systems historically stacked against them. Crockett's composure in the face of condescension was a declaration. Talent, diligence, and authenticity are stronger than outdated notions of authority or privilege. For minorities, it was a reaffirmation that identity and pride are not liabilities, but strengths, capable of transforming prejudice into empowerment. Across America, the moment symbolized the potential for individuals to rise above entrenched hierarchies, to assert themselves without sacrificing principle. Her response was proof that representation matters, that seeing someone like her succeed in real time can inspire countless others to believe in their own agency. Beyond identity politics, the lesson spoke to universal human experience. Each of us encounters moments designed to diminish, to provoke fear or doubt. Crockett's performance became a masterclass in turning adversity into affirmation, in converting confrontation into clarity. The moment encouraged viewers to recognize their own power, to trust that resilience and integrity can and will triumph, even when the odds appear stacked. It was not a lesson confined to politics, it was a life lesson. By reframing the insult, Crockett transformed the narrative from personal attack to collective inspiration. She shifted the focus from conflict to principle, from humiliation to triumph, from noise to meaning. The crescendo of her moral clarity resonated not only because of her words, but because of what they represented: the enduring strength of character over superficial authority. The applause, the social media praise, the media analysis, all of it was validation, but the deeper victory lay in the affirmation that truth and dignity cannot be silenced. And so, as the cameras faded and the nation digested what had transpired, the emotional uplift was unmistakable. People felt emboldened. They saw that standing firm, speaking truth, and carrying oneself with integrity could create ripples far beyond a single moment. They felt validated, inspired, and empowered. Jasmine Crockett's calm courage had not only answered O'Reilly's arrogance, it had ignited hope, pride, and a renewed belief in the power of voice and resilience. In that quiet yet resounding triumph, the world was reminded: dignity always outlasts bluster. Service outweighs status and courage. Calm, deliberate, unwavering can move a nation. Bill O'Reilly tried to diminish Jasmine Crockett, but instead he amplified her legacy. What was meant to be an attack, a moment of belittlement, became a defining chapter in her story. A moment designed to silence her only magnified the principles she embodies: courage, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The nation saw it, the world saw it, and history will remember it. The lesson is clear and undeniable: dignity outlasts arrogance. Loud words fade, posturing crumbles, and ego collapses, but character endures. Jasmine Crockett's calm, deliberate, and unshakable response reminded us all that power rooted in respect, in service, and in steadfastness carries a resonance far beyond any fleeting insult. In a world where bravado often overshadows substance, she proved that true leadership is measured not by the volume of your voice, but by the weight of your actions and the clarity of your conviction. And now, this story becomes more than a broadcast, more than a debate clip. It becomes a movement, a call to recognize and honor those who stand with dignity, who speak truth without fear, and who inspire others to do the same. If you believe truth will always outshine arrogance, share this story. Let it reach every corner where voices are silenced and courage is tested. Subscribe, engage, and join us in standing for voices like Jasmine Crockett's. Voices that remind us that integrity, resilience, and calm courage can change not just a debate, but the world. Because in the end, it is not the insults that endure, it is the dignity that answers them.